it's taking us just a second is because there are 4 streamers and we're getting ready to go up. Is everybody live?
Yep.
I am.
We're ready to go.
Share the live, share the live, share the live.
Please.
You guys are islands in the stream.
Please.
Get it?
share.
Get it?
Mr. Mour, you called us today for this meeting because you have an update on a case that affects all protesters.
Yes, it
and
does.
It has to do with the Hurstbourne gunman. So
Right.
please share.
Thank you, Tara, Riot, Sherry, and Summer. If you all recall, back in September, I believe the date was September 18th, so it was 5 days before what I call the non-announcement on Breonna Taylor's case. In any event, that day, it was a Friday, a large group of protesters traveled to the Attorney General's East End office, which is on Whittington Parkway, just kind of in the intersection of Hurstbourne Lane and Shelbyville Road. There was a rally held there asking the Attorney General to do his job, which he apparently didn't listen. The protesters then left that office, went out onto Whittington, marched north on Whittington, turned to the right or east on Shelbyville Road. When they arrived at the corner of Hurstbourne Lane and Shelbyville Road, which is maybe 2-3 blocks up, the police forced everyone to turn south on Hurstbourne Lane, which they did. It was a nonviolent, peaceful protest. It was a large group, and some of you were there. I think all of us were there.
Yep.
And unfortunately, the events that occurred, I was lagging way behind. I was chasing around a 14-year-old to make sure she was doing what I asked her to do, and she was that day. But what happened was there was an individual in a vehicle who pulled sort of up towards the protesters in an aggressive manner, waving a handgun from the window of his vehicle. Eventually was confronted by Robin Ash with her weapon to force him to stand down, which he fortunately did. He later got out of his vehicle and was pointing his weapon in one direction and looking the other direction, just a classic violation of every firearm safety standard and rule that you would want to have and should have. Ultimately, Robin Ash was arrested by the police on the scene, and there were a lot of police on the scene. And not only were the police on the scene, but their helicopter was there videoing everything. The live streamers were videoing everything. In particular, Sherry Wright was pretty close and videoed everything. And so were you, Tara. Robin was arrested, and there was a story on WDRB Saturday morning about, evil protester pulls gun on innocent individual, innocent victim, which absolutely was not the story. By Monday, it became, and I'll never forget, I went to arraignment court on Saturday morning, and the prosecutors wanted this huge bond for Robin. And I was like, I told the judge, I said, Judge, this is once again a false narrative that's been put out by LMPD, and it was fed to WDRB, which, as I've said before, stands for We Don't Really Believe What We Publish. By Monday, WDRB had walked back its narrative, its story, that Robin Ash was the aggressor, and it was clear at that point that it was Jim Geisler, is the guy's name, who was in the vehicle and portrayed himself as a victim. Robin was arrested, jailed, charged. She spent at least 24 hours in jail. We went for a preliminary hearing. In the criminal process, if you're charged with a felony, which she was charged with wanton endangerment, which is a Class D felony, which carries up to 5 years in the penitentiary, so they were holding that over her head. We went to a preliminary hearing about 3 weeks later, and the county attorney put a police officer who had arrested Robin on the stand, and they continued their narrative of claiming that Robin Ash had committed a felony of wanton endangerment. She was also charged with criminal mischief for the alleged damage to Geisler's vehicle. At the preliminary hearing, make a long story short, The county put the police officer on the stand, showed video. They actually showed Sherry Wright's video and the police helicopter video. And from those images, it was clear as day that the aggressor in the situation was Mr. Geisler, that Robin Ash had committed absolutely no crime, and furthermore, Robin had engaged in lawful self-defense and defense of others, because there was literally 100 or more protesters out there. There were people in vehicles, behind Geisler's vehicle. The police were out there. I mean, Mr. Geisler endangered everyone out there, including himself, but he endangered everyone out there. During the preliminary hearing, as I said, the county put a police officer on who read it's a narrative report contained in an arrest citation, and the officer read that. They showed the video and continued with their mantra that Robin Ash was a dangerous felon that needed to be indicted. I cross-examined the police officer, and in a narrative report, there's fact A, B, C, D of what Robin allegedly did, and I asked him, I said, well, isn't it true that all of the information on the narrative report you received from Jim Geisler that day? And he said yes. And I asked the officer, I said, have you done any investigation, any background into watching video? I mean, it was in all the papers. Have you looked at anything? Have you looked at your own LMPD helicopter video? No. And I had the prosecutor replay the video, and I told the police officer, I said, anytime you see all of these facts that are set forth in this narrative report, anytime you see any of these facts occur on the live stream or from the helicopter, I want you to have the prosecutor stop the video. She stopped the video 0 times. And at the end of the day, I asked the officer, I said, essentially all of the information contained in this narrative report that you received from Jim Geisler, it's not true, is it? And he reluctantly acknowledged that it was not. The judge, nevertheless, sent the case to the grand jury, believing there was probable cause on the day that the officer arrested Robin on September 18th. I tried to explain to the court unsuccessfully that I wasn't quarreling with, on the scene, if Jim Geisler told the officer A, B, C, D, and those things made up the offense of wanton endangerment, okay, he had probable cause, reasonable suspicion, whatever you want to call it, to arrest her. But 3 weeks down the road, when everyone's had opportunity to review the facts, to review video, to talk to witnesses, of which there were hundreds, it was clear that Jim Geisler was the aggressor here. Jim Geisler should be charged with wanton endangerment. I'll get to that in just a minute. Sherry Wright. And I told the judge, I said, Lady Justice is blind, but she's not a fool. And we cannot base a finding of probable cause on information we know now is false, fraudulent, whatever you want to call it. She sent it to the grand jury. I contacted the Commonwealth attorney, which presents cases once there's a finding of probable cause, presents them to the grand jury. I contacted the assistant Commonwealth attorney who was going to submit the case to the grand jury, spoke to him about the case, made a request as permitted under the rules of criminal procedure that the grand jury be told all of this information. The grand jury be shown the live stream video. The grand jury be shown the LMPD helicopter video. And most importantly, I wanted the grand jury to be shown the citation with the narrative, and then be shown the testimony of the police officer at the preliminary hearing, where the police officer said, none of this is true. All of this is false. And to the credit of, I don't give prosecutors a lot of credit all the time, or really any time, but to the prosecutor's credit on this one, the system worked for Robin Ash, because the Commonwealth attorney presented the case to the grand jury, showed the information, and asked the grand jury not to indict her, and they did not, and they returned the case to the district court. Last week, I think it was Thursday, the case was on the district court docket on my motion to dismiss, and the court dismissed the charges against her. That being the case, on Friday, we filed a civil lawsuit against Jim Geisler and against the police officer for, among other things, malicious prosecution. And I think this sends a message to the law enforcement community and to the community as a whole that you know, the narrative that's been spun, the tales that have been spun all summer into the fall and now into the winter of these evil protesters, they should all be arrested, they're all rioters, they're all bad, they're all evil people. It's just false. And we saw last week in the consulting report, I can't remember the name of the company, but the consulting report.
Hillard Heinz.
Thank you. That the taxpayers paid $200,000 for. And the conclusion essentially of that was that the community as a whole, and in particular black folks, don't trust the cops, number one. And number two, that policing is not done in an equitable, racially fair and just manner. And I've been saying that for months and months and months, and there's studies that told us that for years and years and years. I kind of feel like Fisher owes me $200,000 that if he pays me, I'll donate it to charitable organizations and to the live streamers. But
We don't take payment, but thank you.
Women to Well does take payments though.
well, yeah.
Donations.
Hope Bus, I can think of Donnie Green, I can think of a lot of
Yep.
other folks that could have used that $200,000.
That's right.
But my point here is this case, Robin Ash's case, is a microcosm of the results of that report. And that is that here we are months down the road from this event. Robin Ash is finally, rightfully exonerated after she's had to hire a lawyer and go through hell, spend a night in jail, and live knowing there were a felony charge against her that she did not commit. Oh, they also dismissed the damage claim, criminal mischief charge against her because it was obvious from the video Robin never touched the guy's car. The car may have been damaged, but it sure as hell wasn't by Robin Ash. So that was dismissed too. But the point is that if that would have been, well, let me say it this way. A few weeks after this event occurred, I went there were 3 live streamers there. It was Riot Heart, Tara Bassett, and Sherry Wright. We went, and Heather Lundberg Green was there because all of you all were present the day this event happened. And we went to the 8th Division and swore a criminal complaint against Jim Geisler, the true perpetrator in this case, who should in fact be charged with multiple counts of wanton endangerment. And I personally was there, gave my card to the police officer. To my knowledge, none of the folks that filed a report have heard a peep from LMPD.
Nope.
I've heard nary a peep from LMPD.
Not a word.
So once again, here's that narrative that Hillard Heinz, whatever the hell their name is, to the tune of $200,000 told us that white folk and black folk aren't treated the same by the police. Well, no shit. Especially in Louisville, in a lot of places, but especially in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'll give you an update on another case
Before we leave that case, I just
Okay.
want to point out that I believe that at the time of the incident, Mr. Geisler appeared astonished that he had wandered into the midst of this protest and really had no idea what was going on.
That's a fiction too, isn't it, Tara?
Well, it is, because I discovered that about a month earlier on my own live stream, Mr. Geisler threatened me and told me to stay out of Norton Commons, where I had been
Yep.
sent on a mission to discover a direct action that involved mattresses with bullet holes in them, and unbeknownst to me, I thought I was going there on a production job. So he actually threatened me directly on my live stream,
Yep.
which completely indicates to me, as though I'm speaking as an attorney, which I'm not, some sort of premeditation on
Well,
his part.
He
because-
has a history of
He
that.
does,
Yeah.
and I told some of the mainstream media had asked me about him, and I said, I'm pretty certain that there is a video of him and his wife harassing some ladies who were buying water and other supplies for protesters at a store. I'm not sure if it was a Dollar General or a Walmart, whatever, but it was local, and it was way back in the beginning. It was like either the first weekend in May or right after that, sometime in June, where they were literally harassing and saying very negative things about Black Lives Matter and this, that, and the other. This guy has portrayed himself as a victim. He is not a victim. There's a, whatever they call it, GoFundMe up, where he wrote a letter on this GoFundMe portraying himself as this, put upon victim, that he stumbled upon this massive protest. And if you watch the helicopter footage, it's not as easy to see from Sherry or Tara's footage, but if you watch the helicopter footage, he clearly inserts himself into that situation. As a matter of fact, in his letter that he wrote on, there's a lady named Sassy Utsi who set up a GoFundMe. She's a friend of he and his wife, Geisler and his wife, and on that page, and I screenshotted it, it's a letter that he wrote claiming that he was stopped at a light and was confronted by all these hundreds of
Yeah,
protests.
that's not true.
It's just, it's the whole thing, and he claims that
He definitely drove.
his vehicle was surrounded by 100 people, and 10 of them were beating on his vehicle, damaging his vehicle. And these are the questions that I asked in the preliminary hearing. Please show me where that happened.
Right.
None of it happened. This guy is not a victim. He's an aggressor, and he, in my opinion, this is my opinion, he should be charged with a crime because, by God, if that were a black person that would have done that, I can promise you they would have been charged with a crime. And he actually, according to one of the witnesses there, he actually had his window rolled down and pointed his gun at her. She was a lady on a motorcycle, and made some threatening remarks to her even before he pulled up into the line of traffic. And it's this information doesn't just come. Let me tell you a neat little story about what a small town Louisville, Kentucky is. So after I started representing Robin way back in September, it was the following week after she'd been arrested on Friday. I'd gotten her out of jail on Saturday. On Monday or Tuesday, maybe Wednesday of the next week, I get an email from another lawyer in the community he's a title lawyer. And title lawyers, they don't know anything about criminal law, but he said, "Hey, David, I was in the line of traffic directly behind Jim Geisler. I saw my son was with me. We were going wherever. He pulled into the line. He was aggressive. He was the aggressor from the get-go. If anybody should be charged, it's that guy right there." I also sent that to the Commonwealth Attorney. So it's not, don't just take our word for it because, geez, we're protesters. We're not truthful about anything. But here's an independent witness, an attorney in the community, a well-respected attorney in our community, who says, "I saw the whole thing, and this guy was aggressive and was the aggressor." And according to his description, it meets the description of wanton endangerment, which is what Robin was charged with. I mean, and this is the narrative all summer long of LMPD that, well, here's this allegation of what happened, and here's our version of it. And I did a little poem on my Facebook page the other day about the live stream. The revolution is being live streamed, and that's what's changed the narrative of everything is cell phones and live streams. And how many times have we seen this summer LMPD said, "Oh, this is what happened," and there's massive, voluminous live stream evidence, video evidence that it's not true. I mean, you go back to the tank, you go back to the pepper ball riot where they claimed that it was necessary, that was on July 9th, where they claimed it was necessary to shoot pepper balls at protesters to get them away from a car. That was a total lie. They were shooting pepper balls at protesters a half an hour before that car even appeared on the scene.
I was there.
Yeah, well, that's the first night my daughter was beaten up by the cops in the garage. And that brings me to another case that happened this morning. Cheyenne Osawala was arrested that night with my kid and a bunch of the other kids that were in the garage. Two of them were arrested that night. Eli was arrested and Cheyenne was arrested. And Cheyenne was doing absolutely nothing other than videoing what was going on. And the police officer, when he arrested her, grabbed her, his name's Corey Galloway, and I've already sued him. He grabbed her and yanked her arm so hard up, and if you all don't know, Cheyenne Osawala is she's tall, she's 5'10", 5'11". She probably weighs, my left leg weighs more than Cheyenne. I mean, she might weigh 120, 130 pounds, spaced out over 5'11" and long arms and legs. And, this Corey Galloway guy was just an animal. He broke her wrist this morning, and he charged her. I don't even remember what he charged her with, but I'd already told the prosecutors, I won't plead to this case. I won't agree to any dismissal that involves a stipulation of probable cause. I had another case last week where the protester client was charged with resisting arrest, and I said, "Isn't that a Corey Galloway case?" And the prosecutor said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm not pleading any prosecutor or any protester guilty on any case involving Corey Galloway where he's alleging resisting arrest or anything that involved the use of force." One of my goals in life right now is, at the end of the day, to see that Corey Galloway is no longer a Louisville Metro police officer at some point, and then he's no longer a police officer anywhere.
What I want to know is what steps need to be taken to correct the obvious failure of police officers, and not just at LMPD, but this is an endemic nationwide problem, to properly charge people with legitimate things that will enable them to prosecute successfully, so that the people who are committing crimes receive, you know, their just punishment, but people who are accused of doing things that they haven't done or that are outrageously over the top, you know, charges can be immediately dismissed.
And it's a huge problem. In my opinion, is this: the actions of LMPD have been designed throughout the summer, throughout protesting, to suppress First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights of protesters. And it's interesting, one of the things that was in the study that I think had, what?
By Hilliard Heights.
Yes, the consulting report, whatever, $200,000 report. One of the things that was interesting is the notation that there's low manpower on the street, and oftentimes during the protests, and this is one of the things that I always wondered about, you know, while things were going on from night to night, the reaction of LMPD would be completely different. And I'm like, who the hell's in charge over there? And some nights I felt like there isn't anybody in charge over here. And you know what? I was right, because one of the things they said was that there are, a lot of times, the acting sergeant is a patrolman, is the senior patrolman on the scene who's not trained as a sergeant. Sergeants go through supervisory training, decision-making training, all types of training and education that allows them to make decisions on the scene. So
With now an average of 4 years of experience because
Right.
of the attrition of the rest of the force.
Right. So we've got these guys on the street, and guys and gals on the street, that are inexperienced, they're youthful, they're young, they had no idea what they were doing. And for example, the night that my daughter was arrested on December 17th, I love this charge. She's charged with unlawful assembly. My question is, who on the scene declares an assembly which has been gathered to exercise First Amendment rights to protest and for free speech? Who decides this is an unlawful assembly? Well, obviously, who knows who was making those decisions? So it is a huge problem. Charging is a huge problem. And one of the things we're seeing these ridiculous charges that the prosecutors are now, just because they're so overwhelmed and overburdened, it's sort of a 2020 and into 2021 it's just a perfect storm of things that have just created a mess of pretty much everything. And you know, they're overburdened, and all these cases of obstructing a highway, unlawful assembly, failure to disperse, most of those they're just dismissing because they're never going to be able to prove those in a million years.
Well, and Detroit just dropped 238, protesters'
Yeah.
charges, mostly misdemeanors.
Right. Well, here's my thing, and my call to the new police chief. What's her name? Erica
Shields.
Erica Shields. My call and prayer to her would be this: unless a police officer was injured by an aggressive, violent act of a protester, or unless property was clearly, without provocation, without cause, damaged or destroyed, as a show of good faith towards the African American community, in particular in light of the Hilliard Heights consulting report, she should go to our county attorney's office and say, as an agency, as an organization, LMPD wants all charges against protesters, unless a police officer was injured, or someone was injured, or property was damaged. We want those charges dismissed. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Not because we can't prove it or the statutes are unconstitutional, because it's the right thing to do to build a bridge to the African American community and their allies who are supporting them, and say to these people, we want to work with you, we want to heal our community. And that would be a huge, massive showing of community to those in our city that need that showing. And it would build such a bridge, but I don't see it happening.
Especially the fact that having felonies dangling over your head
Yeah.
prevents you from living your life.
Right. Well, and here's another thing they do. Not only have a lot of people been charged with just these BS, obstructing a roadway, failure to disperse, and resisting arrest where people were not resisting arrest, but one of their favorites is enhanced possession of marijuana. So if you're arrested, now keep in mind, a year or so ago, it was more than a year ago, it was about 2 years ago, the county attorney's office announced if you're stopped or arrested and your most serious charge is possession of personal use marijuana, 8 ounces or under, and that's the most serious charge, they will not prosecute that charge. So the message to the police is, yeah, we know it's on the books, but we're just not wasting time with marijuana anymore, all right? But what they do with regard to protest, and they do it to other people, it's not just protesters, but particularly with protesters. If you had a gun for personal protection, a lawfully possessed handgun or any kind of weapon, and you had, let's say, in my day we call it a joint, they call them blunts now, and you had a marijuana cigarette on you, they're charging these people with enhanced possession of marijuana, which is a Class D felony. And I've told the county attorney's office, I've said, look, if I have a case and there's one of these, I will not even discuss resolution of the claim with you, the case with you, until you amend the charge and get rid of that. Because under the books, the statute books, the only way that they could prove that charge is they have to show that the possession of the weapon furthered the offense of possession of marijuana. Well, how in the world does having a gun further the offense of possession of marijuana? The only way I could ever envision it is if someone's standing there holding their joint in one hand and their gun in the other hand saying, if you take my marijuana, I'll shoot you. And I doubt that's ever happened. So they continue to do that, and they use it as a threat, because on a couple of my cases they've said, well, unless you agree to plead to this and surrender your lawfully owned property, shakedown, which is a violation of the 8th Amendment, we're gonna enhance and charge a whole bunch of other stuff and other felonies that we could. And it's in my opinion, it's, prosecutors hold a different role than private defense attorneys, in that a prosecutor is a minister of justice. And sometimes a prosecutor has to look at the whole situation and just say, this is just not right. What's going on here is not right, and I'm going to take proper action. And the prosecutor who presented the case, Robin Ash case, to the grand jury, saw that role, recognized that role, and acted as a minister of justice, and did the right thing and said, don't indict this lady, and they didn't. So it is a huge problem, and some of it just comes down to training. And we have got to, this police department in our town is, and I hate the word defund. I think it was a bad word.
Yeah,
I don't like that word, but there's no question that this police department needs to be dismantled, restructured from the bottom up, funds reallocated. We've gotten away from police in the United States, and I have a police administration degree from the University of Louisville in 1982. We have gotten away from the concept of police in America being civilian peace officers. And our police in America, in most places, and in particular in our hometown, they resemble an occupying military force in a foreign country. And they have done things to the citizenry here in Louisville, Kentucky, that if we saw a foreign government do to its own people, we'd turn them into a sheet of glass. We'd bomb them until the cows come home.
Can we go back to the Hurstbourne gunman one more time?
Yes.
And I believe Sherry will have something to add to this too, but she and I were shooting in such close proximity to the car. We actually got him on both of our lives, driving into the procession of protesters who were in the eastbound lanes contained. He brandished his gun.
He was heading
He was going
northbound.
Northbound,
Right.
right. And we were on Hurstbourne Lane by that time.
Right.
He drove into the procession of protesters. He brandished his gun. He waved it out the window. He pointed it at a number of us. And then, after the initial encounter, actually got out of his car.
Yep.
Out of sight, or that was where the helicopter video stopped.
Right.
It didn't show
Of
him
course.
getting out of his car.
Right.
But he did brandish his weapon directly at one of the protesters and pointed it at several of us.
Yep.
So we
Right.
were all in imminent danger. And the thing that disturbs me more than anything is that we are not getting responses
Nope.
to the charges that we attempted to file, because Our lives were put in danger by this man who had previously threatened us.
I know, Tara, but you are live streamers who are in the civil rights movement who are telling the truth about what's being done to black people. And that's the problem when it comes to protecting black people and observing the rights of black people. It does not happen in America. And if you want the most glaring example of that that's ever happened, look at the news footage from January 6th at the United States Capitol and all of the white idiots who trashed and stormed our Capitol with the design of taking hostages and hanging elected
shooting in the
representatives. A police officer was murdered, killed by these people. And I think I saw a story somewhere that the day of the Breonna Taylor announcement, 120 some odd local protesters were arrested in Louisville. And the day of the Capitol, I call it an insurrection, the day of the U.S. Capitol insurrection, I think maybe 14 people were arrested that day, and the rest of them were allowed to leave. And I submit to you, if that would have been black protesters doing that to the United States Capitol, they wouldn't have gotten their feet on the second step of the Capitol stairs, and they'd have been shot down like dogs in the street. And the ones that weren't dead and stuffed into body bags would have been stuffed into paddy wagons and arrested. There ain't nobody would have left that place if that had been black people. So the treatment of black folks by law enforcement, and the Hilliard Heights report illustrated that black people are, and we've known this for years, that black people are arrested more frequently. They're overcharged. They're charged with more serious offenses. It's the evidence is there. The proof is there. And now we have a report. And the interesting thing will be, what will Mayor, what's his name? Fisher. What will he do? I mean, I'm sorry, but the mayor, and our mayor has had so many chances to build a bridge and do right, and he's pissed away almost every single opportunity that I can think of he's had. Perfect example, the hiring of Chief Shields. Never met Chief Shields, don't know Chief Shields, don't know a whole lot about her other than what I've read, but you can't tell me that out of 330 million Americans, there's not one African American law enforcement official somewhere who could have led this police department into the future and into reform and into restructuring.
Well, since we're talking about a race at this point, and you made the point that charges, this gentleman who is white, who pointed his weapon at us, was endangering black people, and that the people who were representing the media not only included live streamers, but mainstream media and legal observers who were of all races. This person did not just endanger black people, he endangered white people. So white people should be concerned that someone...
people that were standing up for black people.
That's right.
But I was there. My daughter was there.
White people should be concerned about the fact that, this guy wasn't just targeting one group of people. He was endangering a whole lot of people.
As well as objective legal observers.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, but if you remember way back in the very beginning, I went to Wagner High School. I grew up in the East End, and that's the lap of privilege, no question about it. And there was a caravan one night that went through Prospect, and it was out on social media that, oh my God, there were protesters caravanning through Prospect, and they were reckless, and they were damaging property, and they drove through yards, and they were ransacking and looting stores, and they did this and they did that. The whole thing was false. The whole narrative was just not true. And it turned out, I went to undergrad school with the police chief out there, Chief Sherrard, and he put out a statement and basically said it was loud, obnoxious, annoying, inconvenient, everything a protest is supposed to be, but it was lawful. I mean, the things that were being portrayed. One of my best friends out there said, oh, I've got a friend who said that her kids were a carload of teenagers or young kids were at the corner of 42 and the Snyder right out there where the caravan came back, and there were protesters beating on the top of their car. And I said, buddy, let me tell you something. I said, in 2020, if you're talking about teenagers, kids, I said, my teenager walks around with her phone attached to her hand. I think the skin has grown over the phone. She can't let go of the damn thing. I said, if there'd have been people beating on their cars, there'd be a video. Show me a video. Show me the proof of all that. and there isn't any because it never happened. And it's these continued fictions about what's going on in the movement and the protesters, and it's ridiculous. And you know, a group of slobs dressed like, you know, out for the deer hunt can go to Frankfurt and rush the governor's mansion and bang on his windows and scare the hell out of his children
And hang him in effigy.
and hang him in effigy, and not a damn one of them got arrested.
Yep.
And they went around barricades.
And they should have.
Every one of them should have been
Yep.
arrested. But by God, if, you know, I remember one night, right after the Breonna Taylor announcement, one of the most peaceful marches we had gone out of downtown and we were coming back. I think we were on Main Street, and where the 65 overpass is, the police stopped us, started shooting, for no reason, shot the flashbangs and tear gas. I was there that night, and absolutely no reason to do that. And they kept people in, and they were just looking for a reason to arrest these people, to suppress, to oppress. And that's their mantra, suppress. I might write a song about that.
You should.
That's their mantra, to suppress.
That jacket, that guitar, that's all.
There you go. And that's what LMP does. They suppress and they oppress. And I call on Erica Shields to stop it,
Yeah.
to make them stop, make them do their job. And I have said for months and months and months and months, I have a police administration degree. I was a Graymore, Devondale policeman, fresh out of when I was in police administration school 37 years ago. My brother's a retired United States Capitol policeman. Go figure on that one. I was a Louisville police legal advisor by contract at the beginning of my career. I've represented the Shively FOP for years. I respect the police 100% and back the police 100% when the police obey the law and respect the law. And look at my lives and my photos of the police cars parked downtown around the courthouse. They don't even honor parking regulations. How many times have you been on the interstate and seen a cop go by you 100 miles an hour, no lights, no siren, no nothing? They don't respect the law. So I respect the police 100% when they respect and obey the law, number one. And number two, when they respect and honor the civil, constitutional, and human rights of all people, of all shapes, colors, and sizes, across the board equally. And LMPD, folks, it ain't none of the above in the last 10 or 12 years, and really, in particular, in the last 8, 9, and 10 months since protesting's begun. And, you know, we've got a long way to go to make that change, and I've said all along that in order for the police to get the confidence and trust of the people back, they have to stop lying and stop their culture of dishonesty and lack of transparency, number one. And number two, they have to respect everyone equally. And importantly, and one of the questions you asked, Tara, was this. The problem that I've seen in policing, and I've been a lawyer this will be 36 years this year, and this is a problem that I've seen really since 911, which has been, what, all 20 years now, this year, right? Yep.
Mhm.
Police are not trained to de-escalate, to ratchet a situation down, to back it off. And if you challenge or question the authority of a police officer, usually, in any way, shape, or form, it's on. And if you're black, or a person of color, or a person at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale, it's on to the extent you may not be going home tonight, and you may not be going home ever,
Right.
except in a box. And that's what we've lost. And part of that I chalk up to the hiring standards have changed. And a lot of the people in policing now, it's always been this way, but I think it's more so since 911. A lot of them are military.
Recruiting of ex-military.
They're recruiting ex-military. And in the military, I was in Air Force ROTC, and in the military, you are taught to kill. It's a different mission. The mission of the military is different than the mission of police. The mission of police should be to protect. The mission of the military is kill.
And
And-
interestingly, the research by news organizations into the Capitol insurrection is the extraordinary number of ex-military being recruited into white supremacist organizations.
That's exactly right.
Yep. And there it is. And I have said all along, all summer, from the beginning, that in my opinion, not necessarily the brass, the command staff at LMPD, but the rank and file, some, if not many of them, are either sympathizers of or members of some of these groups. And the proof of the pudding is this, that we've seen these groups come into town and be able to do things that if black protesters would have done, they'd have been shot. They'd have been killed. And if you look back, all the way back to the night after Tyler Girth was killed and the snipers that on the roof that I busted LMPD out on, they lied about how those snipers were found. They told me at a live stream meeting at the old county courthouse, and Jesse, thank you. I asked at that meeting, how did you all find them? And they said, oh, the helicopter. That's not true. Those snipers were found by a citizen called in and said, hey, you guys she called in the 911 to MetroSafe and said, you got snipers on the roof of a hotel parking garage, you better go check it out. LMPD knew at that point, well, if we don't go check this out and somebody gets shot, boy, are we really in trouble. And it would have come out.
So it came down to a matter of
They went and grabbed them only because it had been reported on a recorded line on the 911 line. Well, then, if you read the reports that I made them give me in the open records lawsuit, they said we detained and restrained them, but then let them go and gave them a ride to meet their militia buddies up at Broadway and Preston. I mean, if you don't need proof that, and I love this word. I first heard this word from a black client in Western Kentucky I said, why did you hire a lawyer from Louisville? He goes, well, I don't trust the judges and the prosecutors down here. I don't even trust the local lawyers because they're in cahoots with the cops and with the prosecutors. And to a degree, in small towns, that's true. And you think Louisville's racist? Come out to Western Kentucky with me someday on some of my cases out there, and you'll really see it. But anyway.
So Dave, one follow-up question to
Yes,
the Hurstbourne gunman situation is, are we at the end of our legal options with this? I mean, since
No.
we haven't been called back?
Nope. I'm going to, I called the 8th the other day and left a message for the major. I guess it was Friday maybe. I haven't heard back. I'm going to call again today. And if I don't hear anything from that, I'm going to go to professional standards and complain that, these people have filed a pretty serious report of a person placing in danger hundreds of people.
Which is documented on video.
And it's documented on video. It's been in the news. It's all over the place, and nobody seems to care.
Well, it was interesting that day because when the news media took the version that had been put out by the public information officer, the helicopter footage cut off, obviously, before the major encounter took place. And the narrative was reversed, and Sherry and I both took our videos to the mainstream media. 2 stations came out, interviewed us all at Hurstbourne Lane, and demonstrated very clearly that the case that had been presented was not at all the truth, and that the live streams showed the truth.
They've known from the beginning what happened.
This has been months now.
Right, and they continue to call him a victim.
Right. And I even, if you all remember, the reason why I said we needed to go, or you all needed to go to the 8th Division was I actually talked to the county attorney's office about it and said, hey, how come this Jim Geisler guy has a charge? Oh, well, that's not a county attorney issue. That's a police issue. And I'm like, well, then how come you all are always telling me that, well, if your client doesn't plead to this, we're going to amend charges and charge them with this. You all have the power to charge people. They're law enforcement officers to a degree as well, and prosecutors. Charge this guy. And I think I'm not going to stop till this man's charged.
Well, I know we drove all the way out to Middletown and spent an hour waiting for a police officer even to come out and take our names and addresses and information, and that's the last that we've heard of it. And the police officer who came out was very sympathetic, very professional. I just don't know why it stopped at that point, because we as citizens should have the right to report our lives being threatened by someone.
Do you remember his name?
I don't.
I do.
What is it?
Let me.
I don't remember my own name some days, so.
He was very professional.
His name was Officer Paget.
Paget, yes, nice guy,
Very nice
sympathetic, understanding, took the information, said he'd do a report, turn it over to their 8th Division detectives, and it's crickets since then. And, it just kills me that I get clients who call me and say, I think there's a warrant for me because there's something on the RTCC, the cameras over around the square. And, they're reviewing these cameras now from months before and proffering charges against people for stuff that they're seeing. But here we've got a white guy on Hurstbourne Lane who pulls a gun out and he's waving a gun around, endangering hundreds of people, and they don't give a damn. And I call on Chief Shields from Atlanta, do something about this. Show the people of our community, in particular, the black folks in our community, that you care about them, that you care about the movement, that you care about what they're trying to achieve, that you understand that, yes, we've come a long way, but things in America are not the way they're supposed to be. People forget, I'm 60 years old. Black people in America really have only had the right to vote, most of them, in my lifetime, from the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And if you think you're going to fix the vestiges of 400 plus years of slavery, oppression, segregation, fire hoses, dogs, tear gas, if you think you can eliminate that in 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5, 6 generations, it ain't going to happen. And this
I
struggle.
thought you were describing Kenny Walker's arrest just now, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Dogs.
yeah, no kidding.
Sorry.
But this struggle continues every day. Yes, things are better than they were when I was a kid in the 1960s and 1970s, but we're not there. And the promise of our founding documents of all men, women are created equal, black people don't feel that way. And I try to tell my friends in the East End, and I'm writing a book right now, and one of my chapters is called Through the Lens. And white people that I grew up with that look like me will say, well, there's no discrimination. I don't understand why. One of them actually told me one day, Colin Kaepernick is un-American. And I said, why do you say that? Because Colin Kaepernick said America never really has been great. I said, you know what? Through the lens that he's viewed America, and through the lens that this guy's my age, a couple of years younger than me, a 60-year-old white man's lens in view of America is different than a 60-year-old black man. Completely different. To those people, to black people, viewing through their lens, Colin Kaepernick's right. Not to say America's not a great country. There's a lot of beautiful things about America. But there's a lot of ugly. And boy, we really showed our ugly side on January 6th. And our police department has showed its ugly side throughout this. And a lot of people that 2020, and I still feel like we're in 2020. What is today?
Yeah.
Today's December 63rd or 62nd.
February 1st.
Yeah, well, 2020 still.
Happy Black History Month.
Yeah, it's 2020 Redux. 2020 allowed so many people that almost a lot of the people that I've grown up with, knew all my life, acquaintances, friends, people I've known, they're jerks. They're racist jerks. And, racism comes from two things, as I've said all along: ignorance, and it's taught. And, to say, well, hell, we had a black president, so everything's okay. That's a joke. I mean, everything is not okay. And everything is not good. And the economic, what is it, the brass ring, the golden ring or whatever, that I was able to reach for as a kid. Today in 2021, most black kids still don't have the same opportunity to reach for it that my kids do and my grandkids do. It's just not there. And one of the big thumbs that we hold down on black people is the cops, is police, and the way they're treated by the police. And I've watched it for 36 years as a lawyer, and I've watched it for the last 8, 9, 10 months in the middle of a civil rights movement, and I've seen it with my own two eyes. And I mean, I saw my own kid get her ass whipped and get arrested for doing what? For standing there supporting a black guy who was being arrested.
On the sidewalk.
Who he didn't do anything,
Right.
and she didn't do anything. And she ended up in the emergency room and missed the first couple of weeks of her AAU basketball season because the police don't like me, and they don't like her, obviously. And here we are in the middle of this, and it just kills me that people just say, well, it's kind of like the ignorance that was involved in. I'm a sports fan, and for years, I've told my friends, my buddies that I watch football with, I said, the name Washington Redskins, it's got to go. Oh, I don't see anything wrong with that name. I said, it's no different than the N-word. It's no different than if we had a New York team and called them the Kikes. I mean, it's a derogatory term for an indigenous person. And it's those little things in America that people just say, well, it's okay. Confederate flags, swastikas, those symbols, they got to go in this country. And, as a kind of Jewish person, I take offense at that stuff. And when you use that terminology, and I said all along that Washington Redskins that nobody listens to me. My own kids don't listen to me, Summer, you know.
Well, these are
Welcome to the
conversations that,
club, because mine don't either.
But they could have saved themselves by just changing their mascot to a red potato, and then they'd have been good.
these are conversations that need to be had between white people.
Yeah,
Because we're told
Absolutely.
all the time.
I know.
Stop talking to black people about your problems. Go out and solve your own problems. Solve your problems of white supremacy. Talk
Agreed.
to each other.
And
I
don't
know.
come to a BLM protest wearing a Redskins jersey.
Not a good idea.
No.
Not a good
It's,
idea.
not gonna fly.
Any final thoughts, questions? Dave,
Yes, ma'am.
you just said that we are not out of legal options in regards to the
Nope.
Hurstbourne gunman.
Not as long as
So
as long
Robin-
as I breathe, you're not.
And Robin's good, right?
Rob, the charges against Robin have been dismissed. Robin has filed a civil lawsuit against
Awesome.
Jimmy Johnson, the officer who arrested her, did the narrative report, and against Jim Geisler.
Good.
And I guess Jim Geisler can whine and cry and portray himself as a victim and set up a GoFundMe for the legal defense he's going to
She
need.
does a lot of amazing things in this community, and
Yep.
I'm glad that she got
She
the
does.
justice that she deserves. She is one of my houseless
Yes.
outreach co-workers.
Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of outreach together, and I'm very proud that she was able to get that charged out.
Yeah.
Good job, David.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time, Dave. We appreciate you calling us and letting us know what the status is, and, you know, anytime
Yeah,
you've got
and if
updates,
anybody
let us
sees
know.
Jason Downey, tell him that someday I hope that he has a cool jacket.
They're
like I
already
did.
commenting on
They're,
your
they're all
jacket.
on
He
the
was-
thing.
he was-
They're like, Jason, there's the there's the jacket, there's the jacket.
He was curious if your shirt came in a men's cut too.
And I'm sorry.
He was curious if your shirt came in a men's cut. But then,
Well-
but then someone was like, the better question is, does it come in fun size?
Well,
Talking about Jason.
I can assure you that I didn't buy it in the toddler section, Jason.
All right, y'all, have a great day.
We love
Thanks
you
for
guys,
tuning in.
everybody.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, David, as always, and thank you for standing up and helping the protesters.
Oh, you're
Many
welcome.
cases got dismissed today, so
Yeah.
congratulations.